I am so excited right now to be live with the Elmer Dixon, a living legend in Black history. Elmer, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm blessed. I feel so honored to be having this conversation with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No, so there's a couple of reasons. Like, you're doing the work that I love to do. You're living the life that I hope to live. So they say in order to be mentored, you have to like find someone who's doing what you desire, and then extract as much information as possible regarding success strategy. So first we're going to start out with, who are you? You have this amazing book out, and what I loved about it is that it is you were a Black Panther. You were the founding member of the Black Panthers here in Seattle, and you do diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell us more.
Well, I'm a co-founder of the Seattle Black Panther Party, along with my brother, and probably about 10, 15 other people, or maybe even a few more that came in to that initial meeting with Chairman Bobby Seale back in 1968. We were the first chapter formed outside of the state of California, and the longest running chapter, closing our doors in '82. So it was a long journey, a hard-fought struggle. I'm currently president of Executive Diversity Services. Our company has been in business for 38 years. And I'm also current president of an organization called CITAR US. CITAR stands for Society for Intercultural Education, Training, and Research. That's a little bit about my professional life.
I love it. So to have started as a Black Panther, that means you were like, let's go out there and let's drive change. Let's do it, and let's do it now. I feel like we're in a very similar place where I have that Black Panther mentality, like let's go out there and let's drive change. So if you are now able to take the learnings from your Black Panther days to like where we are today, where my focus is in the corporate space. If you think about your executive diversity services, so you're helping organizations and individuals and leaders within the business.
Yeah, let me just say that, and I think most people that did not experience the 60s and 70s perhaps don't realize how the era is very different today. I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. I was born in 1950 in Chicago. In the same neighborhood that Emmett Till came from.
Wow.
And my parents grew up in that same neighborhood. My father was from Kentucky, but moved to Chicago as a child. And when Emmett was murdered in '55, I was 5 years old, and we were living outside of Chicago in Champaign, Illinois. And of course, I don't remember that particular day, but my parents were very, of course, upset, as most Black people across the country were. It was really the launching point for the Civil Rights Movement. It started with this, on the heels of a very violent act. And Black people, of course, were used to this type of violence, particularly in the South, but across the country. But it was so shocking the way that it happened. My father ended up writing a poem that was published in a local Chicago newspaper. It's actually in my book. And so as the years went by, and I, my sibling, my brother, Aaron, as we became aware, we were always raised to be aware of what was going on around us. There is this thing today around woke, and how right-wing people have labeled wokeism as something bad, when in reality, woke simply means that you're aware of the conditions around you, that you're aware of yourself, and you're aware of things around you. And it's important to be aware. We didn't call it a woke back then. And in fact, as I said, my parents made sure that we saw what happened on Bloody Sunday. We saw the aftermath of the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. We marched with King when I was 11 years old when he came to Seattle, and so that was, it was really a staging ground, without me realizing it, without us realizing it, seeing all of these things happen. I often tell audiences that we grew up in an era of assassinations. After Emmett Kennedy was elected in '60, and he was seen as a ray of hope in the Black community, and he was assassinated in '63, the same year that Medgar Evers was assassinated, and the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church and Bloody Sunday. All of those events were happening that same year. As I was 13 years old. But those things, as they were happening, were really shaping the consciousness of particularly young people. And I the other thing that was a kind of a learning ground was the fact that my parents always made sure that we judged people, as King used to say, by the content of their character, and not by the color of their skin. So we grew up in a melting pot neighborhood. Once we moved to Seattle in '57, we moved to Madrona in 1960. And Madrona, we lived across the street from Madrona Park. And the kids that were in that park were Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, white, Black, Latino. And I mean, we had this multicultural upbringing, rich and poor, because we lived on the edge of the red line. We didn't know the red line was there then. We were on the edge of it, as we found out years later. In fact, two of my friends were white and lived on the other side of the red line. My parents also had friends that were very diverse. On some Saturday nights, some of their Black friends would come over and they'd listen to Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, and Count Basie. And they had my dad was very outgoing. He had these Scandinavian friends, he and my mom, that would come by the house, and on after we had polished the floor, the hardwood floors in the living room and dining room, a perfect shine. And while we were polishing those floors, I would add that my dad was playing opera. I saw you at the opera last week. So we were entrenched in La Boheme and Madame Butterfly and the Tales of Opera. So we had a this kind of diverse upbringing. And so these Scandinavian friends would come by and they'd do loud Scandinavian dancing on these hardwood floors. And we're like, they're messing with the floors, but as kids. But on some, in fact, on Passover, we would go over to their Jewish friends' home and celebrate Passover. I had my first matzah ball when I was 12, 13 years old. And so this was kind of this, again, these are things that are preparing me for the future without me knowing it and realizing it. By the time Stokely Carmichael came to Seattle in '67, that was a pivotal moment. It was a pivotal moment in the rise of the Black Power movement. Stokely Carmichael was the first one vocally to say Black Power. He was working as part of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that was working along with the SCLC in the South for doing voter registration. Very dangerous place. And Stokely, said what we need is Black Power. It was kind of the rise of the Black Power movement. Well, he came to Seattle with this message and spoke at my high school, Garfield High School. We'd never heard anything like that. I had heard blurbs of Malcolm, and Malcolm was assassinated in '65, and there was kind of a hush over Malcolm's notoriety, especially here in the North. I didn't learn about him until I began to read about Malcolm, and found out that his philosophy was the philosophy that was guiding the Black Panther Party had started in '66, and we didn't know about the party in '67. But Stokely kind of he awoken, he raised our consciousness. We changed our hair overnight. We're up dark shades. Became a member of SNCC, my brother and I, and so the ball had dropped, and we had moved into a different phase of the civil rights movement. And it was, we started, me and my buddies, I was now entering, that was my junior year, at the end of my junior year in '67. In the fall of '67, as we came into high school, I looked totally different than I had looked before. And me and my buddies, we decided we wanted a Black Student Union. And we started the first high school Black Student Union on the West Coast at Garfield High School. And got into a little trouble. We had to do some protests and demonstrations, and refused to go to class, refused to allegiance. When I was in the stage band. I used to play for the pep assemblies. I got kicked out of school several times, but eventually we got our BSU. And the thing that really propelled that was the fact that when we called this all school boycott of classes, the administration thought it would just be a few Black students that wouldn't go to class, when in fact they'd grown up, the Asian kids and the white kids, the rest of the other Black kids, Latino kids, and so nobody went to class that morning. And the halls were filled with all of the students. So that's how we got our BSU. Several months later, we went to Franklin High School to help them organize their BSU, because Black kids were getting kicked out of school for fighting with white kids, while the white kids went back to class. A young woman was told to go home and come back when she had an afro. She could come back to school when she had an appropriate hairdo. And so Larry Gossett and my brother Aaron, who were at the UW at that time, had informed the BSU at the UW. We and some of us from Garfield went over to Franklin, and we ended up walking into the principal's office and throwing him out, and throwing all of his administration out, and taking over the school. Next day, when he called, he begged us to leave, and that he would give them a Black Studies program and hear their demands and give them a BSU. And so a week later, we're in our geometry class. I'm in my geometry class back at Garfield, and the phone rings. They tell me they want me in the office. When I step out of the classroom, there's two detectives there that arrest me and take me to juvie. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my brother and Larry were being arrested along with Carl Miller out of the UW and taken to jail. And one of my other buddies who had gone to Franklin with me was being arrested on the other side of the school. And when we got to juvie, the TV was on and people were crowded around it. The kids were crowded around it. And we went to see what the commotion was about. And King had already been assassinated, and the streets were burning around the country. And
oh my goodness.
The irony, of course, is that they pulled us off the street before we could see what had happened. And so it was definitely a planned op to pull leaders of this new rising Black Power movement off the streets the day that King was assassinated. So a week later, we traveled in carloads, car caravans, down to San Francisco State University to attend the West Coast Conference of Black Student Unions. And at that conference that Friday night, unbeknownst to us, again, the keynote speaker was chairman of the Black Panther Party, Bobby Seale. And he was mad, he was fiery, pissed off, because 2 days after MLK was assassinated, the first member to join the Black Panther Party, little Bobby Hutton, had been brutally assassinated, shot in the streets of Oakland while in police custody, 20 police bullets. And so chairman was up there with a couple of bodyguards, and when he gave this speech, I remember him saying, "We're going to fight this revolution until our blood runs in the streets." And following his speech, you could see the line drawn in the sand. of the
Mm.
four or 500 students that were in there that come there from all over the country. Most of them were scared to death. And my brother and I and a couple of other people made a beeline to Chairman Bobby and said, "We're in. We want to start a chapter of the Black Panther Party." And so we became the second chapter overall after
Wow.
LA. Central headquarters, of course, was the founding organizations. LA was the first chapter. We became the second chapter, and we became the first chapter outside of the state of California. So the thing that people don't realize and need to understand that we were in a revolutionary movement. We were not in the civil rights struggle. We were not out demonstrating for our God-given rights. We were going to take them. We were demanding them, and we were building a revolution. When Bobby told us to come to Little Bobby's funeral, Chairman Bobby told us to come to Little Bobby's funeral the next day. And when we got into Oakland after we crossed the Bay Bridge, I remember seeing hundreds of young black men and women in leather jackets and berets and military formation. I remember thinking, my God, this looks like a black army. Not only had I not seen so many black people together in one place, but in an organized, like a military army. And when we got into the church, the walls were lined with uh, young brothers and sisters in leather jackets and berets. And down in front was Little Bobby's coffin. And it was draped in a flag, the Black Panther Party flag.
Wow.
And after the services, and it came time to file by the coffin, Mrs. Hutton, like Mamie Till in Chicago, wanted the coffin to be open so that the community could see what the police had done to her son. And I remember walking by Little Bobby's coffin and looking in and seeing him laying there in his leather jacket, his beret, his free Huey button, his powder blue shirt, the uniform of the Black Panther Party, and looking at him and realizing that he was 17 and I was 17, same age. And I thought that could be me lying in that coffin. And it was at that point, there was no turning back. I was ready to die for the people.
Wow.
And so, hence the title of my book is Die Standing, because we were literally preparing for death while we were preparing to liberate the community. So people don't understand the depth of our commitment. This was not you don't see that today. This is not it's not the same atmosphere. It's not the same environment. It's not the same. While the conditions have multiplied in terms of poverty and the institutional racism have continued to multiply and affect Black people, but all oppressed people, in fact. But we were at this pivotal point where we were demanding God-given rights. In fact, when Huey and Bobby had written the 10-point platform and program, point number one says we want freedom, we want the power to determine the destiny of our Black community. And point number two says we want full employment for our people. And you go down the list and you get to point number 7, it says we want an immediate end to the murder of Black people by police in our community. So we were not about words. We went out and took direct action. The very first program that we launched was the Police Alert Patrol. And I was thinking about this, our Police Alert Patrol, the other day when my wife and I were listening to watching one of those TV programs, 48 Hours, and they were talking about this young Black man who had been shot by police, and the police said that he hit them with his car. But all of the evidence pointed to the opposite. In fact, the young men that were in the car said that when they came out of this bar, that because the bar owner had called the cops because people were fighting. And when they came out, they got in their car, and a cop came up to them and told them to move along, waved them, said, "Get out of here." So they started driving, and then there was a police officer standing right in front of them, who just started firing, and hit two passengers in the car, hit a passenger in the car, and killed the driver, the young Black man who was a football player on the local college football team. And I was saying to my wife, I said, "See, if that was 1968 and our Police Alert Patrol was out there, would never have happened." See, because in our police alert patrol, we had a shotgun and we had a law book, and we
Mm.
traveled in teams of 6 to 10, and we would
Mm.
patrol the community. And we saw the cops, we would follow them to make sure that they were not going to harm anyone. And there's an infamous story. I remember Bobby telling us this story about the first police alert patrol. We're down in Oakland, where on the west side of Oakland, busy, black communities with businesses and whatnot. And on a Friday night, people are out having a good time, and a cop car comes rolling down the street and grabs a brother off the corner and throws him up against the car and starts to rough him up. And then out of the shadows march 10 members of the Black Panther Party in leather jackets, berets, shotgun and the law book, and stand right adjacent to where this is happening. And the cop looks up, and he's startled. He says, "What are you niggas doing with them guns?" And he approached Huey, and Huey said, "California Penal Code, California Law Number 683-521 says that we have the right to observe you carry out your duty within the proper distance, and we're going to observe you carry out your duty. And if you try to harm that brother, if you try to murder him, we're going to stop you." And the pig said, "Like hell you are." Started to reach for Huey's gun, and Huey said, "This is my property," and went jacked around into the chamber. And all the other Panthers went jacked around into the chamber. See, that's where the legend of Huey Newton and the Black Panther Party started. And them pigs went running out of the community and let that brother go. You see, and so we took direct action. We were not about asking. We knew our constitutional right. We knew our right to bear arms. We exercised that right, and we were building a revolutionary movement. And all of the programs that you hear about the Black Panther Party, the Children's Free Breakfast Program, where we fed thousands of kids across the country. In Seattle, we had 5 breakfast program sites. We fed 2,000 kids every week. Our free medical clinics. In fact, the only surviving original Black Panther free medical clinic is here in Seattle. It's the clinic that we started in 1970. It's still running today, to this day. We had a free legal aid program. We had a free senior program, a driving program to take seniors to their appointments. See, wow. we had the first food banks. We were doing this in 68, 69, and 70. And wow. people mistakenly say the Black Panther Party had social service programs. They were not social service programs. We called them survival programs pending revolution.
Wow.
Pending revolution, because we were building a revolutionary movement. And so the conditions in terms of how and why we stood up and fought the system were very different than anything you see today. Very different.
Thank you for that.
I need to make that clarification, because I think that there is room for and need for political activism today. It just is it looks different. Today young people are armed with cameras on their cell phones. There were no such thing as cell phones in the 60s or 70s or 80s. And so the reason why that cop who murdered George Floyd is in prison is because the sister turned on her camera and filmed it. So there's different ways of activism today. But I think it's important to understand that the era has shifted. And so you need to be smart about and educated about what you do and how you do it and how you're going to make change. It's very important that people learn about the history of the Black Panther Party, young people in particular, to understand the power that they have in making change. We embarrassed the federal government into providing kids free breakfast in their schools. A lot of people that went to school in the 90s and in the 80s and even early 2000s who got free lunch and free breakfast at school said, oh, the federal government started that. No, that was the Black Panther Party that embarrassed the federal government into doing that. When Obamacare came about in 2012 or 16, whenever it was, no, the Black Panther Party had our free medical clinic in 1970, and it's still running today. Sickle cell anemia, there was a cure for sickle cell anemia that was discovered just 2 weeks ago, and people are saying, wow, sickle cell anemia is finally here. Well, it's a disease that primarily affects Black people. No one even knew about it. It was the Black Panther Party who raised the consciousness of the country in 69 and 70 and 71 and 72 and 73 as we did sickle cell anemia testing all across the country. We went into schools, we went into prisons. And it was because of the Black Panther Party that the National Sickle Cell Anemia Foundation was started in the first place. So it's people need to understand the legacy of the Black Panther Party and how they can take those lessons and they can learn how they can impact stuff today. They're not powerless. People think that they're powerless because of this big bad government that doesn't know how to run, can't run itself. The State of Babylon address last night. I didn't watch the State of Babylon address because I know what Babylon is about. They can pretend all they want. I know what Babylon is about. You got. So anyway, that's a whole other discussion. So people can make a difference in their communities, and they need to understand this. When Bobby came into our mother's home, my mother will be 99 in 2 weeks. When he came to our parents' home, he told us we needed two things. One, we needed to read 2 hours a day and eat classes twice a week, so that we can prepare our minds. That's a message that young people need today, is you need to learn true history and understand who you are and the power that you have. And that's really my message. So that's the BPP part. So we can move on from there.
So when your book is called Die Standing, From Black Panther Revolutionary to Global Diversity Consultant. So First of all, thank you so much for the education.
Right on.
For the clarification, for the specification around who you are, who the organization was, and the depth of the experience. You literally were ready to die standing.
Literally. I had 2 bodyguards when I was 17 years old because J. Edgar Hoover named us the #1 threat to the internal security of the United States that summer of 1968. And he targeted initially 3 cities for elimination: Chicago, LA, and Seattle. They murdered Bunchy Carter and John Huggins in LA, shot him in the back using Maulama Rankaringa, the so-called founder of Kwanzaa, to carry out their dirty deed. That's why we don't celebrate that phony fake disease holiday, whatever it is. Then they went to Chicago that same year and murdered Fred Hampton on the strength of an informant who was Fred Hampton's bodyguard and head of security. And then they went back to LA and attacked the LA office, but they fought them to a standstill. Days after they attacked the LA office, I came to Seattle for us. But we got tipped off. And by a reporter who was down at the police station, saw them gathering all their weapons. And so our offices were fortified like the LA offices were, with sandbags on the walls, bulletproof shields on the windows. We had gas masks. We had thousands of rounds of ammunition. We had legal weapons. And when we got the call that they were coming that night, we were excited because it was payback time. And so we always had 24-hour guards in our office because of the fact that we were under attack at any given time. But also we were on red alert that night. The mayor of Seattle, Ullman, when he was approached by the AFT agents, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agents, to use Seattle police to attack our office, he rebuked them when he asked them, well, why do you want to attack their office? And they said, because they have illegal weapons. And he said, well, my informant says they have legal weapons. And so he wouldn't give them tactical support. And they said, well, we may attack anyway. And he said, well, we'll be there as an observer. Apparently, this comes out of his mouth, and we'll see who the aggressors are. Well, had they come, they would have been in for a big surprise, because we had a squad outside that was going to hit them from the rear, and we had plenty of firepower from inside our office, and so that's how that particular attack was thwarted. But they attempted to attack our offices on a couple of other occasions, but we were able to thwart them. But this was we were at war with the government. They were trying to murder us, and they killed I think in service we lost about 36 members of the Black Panther Party who were killed, assassinated. So we never knew if you stepped out on the street, if it was your time. But we had no fear, see, because we were armed and we were ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. But that's what I'm saying. The commitment level in the Black Panther Party was different than anybody had ever seen. And
right.
You don't see that kind of commitment level today. So now let me transition in, because I know you want to talk about this is
just so fascinating. I just need you to know. So Elmer Dixon, when I saw you at the at the Malcolm X opera,
yes,
I thought, Elmer, that's the Elmer Dixon. Like, wait a minute, I had only heard of you, and now I'm like, oh, I see, Elmer is the real deal. Like, you're like straight up living legend in Black history right here that I'm talking to.
Right, I guess right on. We're so glad, those of us that are still here.
Like, oh my God, that's real. Like that, and honestly, when I watch the things, MLK, they just celebrated the 60th anniversary of MLK's March on Washington, the I Have a Dream speech, right? I mean, we say we're going to continue the dream, right? This is about, it's not a, not a commemoration, but a continuation. So the goal is to continue the work. But you guys, like you said, you showed up with direct action.
Yeah.
And then you went from this Black Panther revolutionary to a global diversity consultant. Tell us about that transition. How did that happen? And just know that I'm so impressed and blessed and grateful to just know you. And I can't wait to talk more about all of this. But tell me more about the transition.
Well, the transition, the ongoing development of, I think, any of my comrades, members of the Black Panther Party, one, I'm blessed to be alive, as are my comrades. We did find out 40 years later, that one of my two bodyguards that went on a trip with me to Oregon was in fact a police informant and set me up, and I got 6 years for stealing a leather jacket and spent time in prison. Fortunately for me, it was I was, in prison for 14 months, and got out alive. The prison captain actually told me and another Panther who was from the Portland chapter, who was had been in a shootout with cops and was in prison with me. And we were there when George Jackson, our field marshal, was murdered in San Quentin, and also during Attica. And I believe it was after Attica that the prison yard filled up, and all of the Black inmates went on one side and the white inmates went on the other side, and whoever was in between, I don't know where they went. But the captain called me and this other brother, Albert Williams, into his office, and he told us that if anything went down, he was going to shoot us first. So the threat was real in prison. Had I been in San Quentin, maybe I wouldn't have made it out. So that's one, that I was blessed to have survived that. As I said, the longest running chapter. The transition, when we ended up closing our office, and all of the stories in my book, it wasn't a direct transition because I didn't know exactly where I was going. I just knew I wanted to do work that was meaningful. I took a job as the branch director of the Al Davies Boys and Girls Club in Tacoma. And while there, when I got there, realized that the money that was left for that club, targeted for that club 40 years earlier, when it was a white club, the white landowners, it used to be called the Downtown Tacoma Boys Club, the tree barons, as you will, the warehousers and whatnot, had left millions of dollars to a club that they thought was going to be for their grandsons 40 years later. And as it turned out, the Hilltop became a black community. So the money was being siphoned off and moved out to the two other white clubs. And I stopped that and got all that money coming back into the club where it was intended for. And so that got me at odds with the director of Pierce County, but I made him make some commitments to not move one in particular, the boxing program, out of that club. That boxing club, by the way, produced world champions and 3 gold medalists: Leo Randolph, Bump City Bumpus. There's 2 or 3 of them came out of the 1980 Olympics, the 1976 Olympics, that came from that boxing club. But anyway, so as I transitioned out of there, I left and I didn't have a job. I got 4 kids I'm raising with my wife, and my dad told me to go see this guy by the name of Walt Hundley, who was the superintendent of the Seattle Park Department. So when I went into Walt's office, Walt promptly reminded me that the last time he saw me was when my brother and I, Aaron, had walked in his office with shotguns, telling him how to run model cities. And I said, "Oh shit, I forgot about that, Walt." But he made me so they created a position as training manager, which I was developing, but which I had to develop, and he also made me the EEO officer. I knew nothing about EEOC, so I had to educate myself, and I reported while I was in HR. I had a reporting relationship directly to the superintendent because he wanted me to, one, recruit women into non-traditional trades. I had to revamp the sexual harassment program and design sexual harassment training. And once the women got there, I had to protect them against harassment because sexual harassment was rampant back then. And so I ended up recommending the firing of a high-level, secure manager, senior manager, and the fire because I'd warned him 2 other times. He was a really nice guy, but he just didn't get it that he couldn't put his hands on women. And ironically, I played that same role when I was the head of the goon squad and security in the Black Panther Party, taking care of brothers that were misusing and abusing women. It's ironic that I had that same one of the roles I had in the Black Panther Party. But anyway, so the firing was upheld, and the 2 women that had started Executive Diversity Services got wind of that and invited me to join the company. So they really they educated me in the whole field of D&I. One of them, our president at the time, Donna Stringer, she had a PhD in cross-cultural psychology, and the other had a master's degree in cross-cultural communication. And they built the foundation and the curricula of our company, which has been recognized and awarded for the work that we've done over the years. But that's how I transitioned into becoming part of the team at Executive Diversity Services. The company was launched in '87. They asked me around '88, and I've been with them ever since. I eventually became their top trainer, became vice president. And when Donna retired, I became president in 2010. That was 14 years ago. So it was so we've been in business 38 years. So It was not something that I had planned, but it was something that I believed that I was destined for. Um,
Right.
there's a another irony in this story, because coming out of the Black Panther Party, we were totally selfless. People don't really realize and understand the life of a revolutionary. Is that
Mm,
we took no payment. We couldn't be bought off. One of the rules of the Black Panther Party was you couldn't accept government funds. That, of course,
mm,
shifted years later when we started when I reopened the clinic and we took money to so that we could have a stable operation. But that
mm-hmm.
was years later. But we were totally selfless. Members of the Black Panther Party gave not only put their lives on the line, but they gave everything in the community. We didn't take anything for ourselves. It's a wonder the party members that are still alive and functioning and living around the country have lives, because the adjustment, the transition was that it's okay to, as they used to say in the Nation of Islam, do for self. You have to be able to raise your family and live a life while you're serving the community. And so that was the biggest transition, was to earn a salary, pay bills. Because when we were in the party, it was like it was a big family. No, we didn't have to pay bills, because there were people in the party that did that, like paid for the whatever the rent was in the cadre houses that we lived in, and our food needs were taken care of because we were comrades. It was an army. And so that was the biggest transition. So now moving into the corporate world, um, people didn't realize and know who I was at the time. The irony, and I was going to tell you the irony in how this transition occurred. The former members of the party, as after we had while we were in the process of closing the doors, had introduced me to her brother.
Mm.
Her brother was a part of this organization called Amway. I don't know if you've ever heard of Amway.
I do remember Amway, yes.
And so the whole idea was that you build this multi-level marketing company so that you could get rich and
Yes.
have a financial independence. Well, that was
Mm-hmm.
juxtaposed to what we were about in the Black Panther Party, because we were building a movement where all oppressed people could be free of oppression and live a life. So even when I first started off, the little thing that I put on my business card was helping people help themselves. I couldn't get beyond the fact that I needed to continue, even as I built this business, was to help people. But the thing that made the shift, because I was trying to make this transition from a Black Panther member, revolutionary, die for the people, and that still will always be a part of who I am. The revolution, you don't kill the revolutionary spirit. It never goes away. And my
Mm.
says the difference between a revolutionary and other freedom fighters or other leaders is that revolutionaries hate oppression.
Mm.
Not only oppression of Black people, but anybody that's oppressed.
Yes.
And that never goes away. And so making this transition and trying to, be about how do I do stuff for me and my family, it was a very difficult place to move. And so one of the things that I learned and heard when I was in this Amway movement was that they talked about getting away from the 40-40 plan. I don't know if
Mm.
you've ever heard of the 40-40 plan.
40 hours and 40 years.
40, you work 40 hours a week for 40 years, you retire and you die.
Right.
And I
Exactly.
literally saw my father do that.
Mm.
He died when he was 60.
Mm.
He never got the opportunity to enjoy life beyond, his all the years that he put into Boeing. And so
Mm.
I said, that ain't gonna be me.
Right.
And I was looking for something that would materialize, that would allow me to pursue and follow that goal, that dream, to be financially independent, but to free myself from the 40-40 plan. And boom, here comes executive diversity services. These women asked me to come in, and that launched the journey. So that's how that transition occurred. Now I was going to say that going into corporate America, they had no idea who I was.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
you know the
They didn't know they were getting a revolutionary.
well, you have to remember, Steve, when we started in '87, there wasn't even an internet. There was
Right.
no internet. And when we got our first major client, United Airlines in '95, where I became the company's top trainer. I opened all of the international locations in Hong Kong and London. You know, we went to India. I opened the international locations. I opened Hawaii, um, and they had no idea who I was. Um,
Right.
and 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 there was, I don't think there was, if in '95 the internet might have just been being born. And so the fervor with which I went about my work, helping organizations create inclusive environments and creating equity, is the same fervor which led me to becoming a member of the Black Panther Party. So
Mm.
I'm moving in that arena, with that same fervor, with that same determination to make sure that people are treated fairly and equitably and included. That's the passion that I have brought uh, to EDS. That's the passion that allows me to do my work. So the spirit of the revolutionary never goes away.
I
I
love
was
that.
I was fortunate enough to find a path where I could continue on really the efforts of the Black Panther Party and trying to achieve a freedom and
Mm.
equity and fairness and inclusion through our work. But people never knew it in those early days. People know it now because you can't go on the internet without finding it out. We've been embraced more in the last 6 years than the previous 40 years because we had our 50th anniversary in Oakland in 2016. And then we had our 50th anniversary here in Seattle in 2018 as the first chapter outside of the state of California. So we've been embraced now more so than before, but we've always been embraced internationally, which is how I became, how this opportunity to speak internationally kind of developed, because that I was invited to a CIATAR conference. I'd mentioned this before, but we had to restart. CIATAR is an organization that's about 40 plus years old. The acronym SIETER, CIATAR, stands for Society for Intercultural Education, Training, and Research. And there's the granddaddy of all of the CIATARs is CIATAR Europa, which is held every 2 years in a different European location. We were in Malta 2 years ago. We're back in Lille this spring.
I love
CIATAR,
that.
CIATAR US, which I'm president of. We just had our conference here, virtual conference. Which I was a keynote speaker of, and we'll go back into our in-person conference next year. But this journey, because I had trained internationally with United Airlines, with PepsiCo and PepsiCo International. We trained on 10 country continents. We had a broad reach in our work. Exxon Mobil was a client. We trained in South Korea and in the Middle East. So we had a very broad bank of clients in our really strong years. But in 2010, I was invited to speak at a conference in uh, Ciotar, France, in northern France, in Lille. And so at the keynote, I was on a panel of 3 keynote speakers. I gave this rousing speech about the Black Panther Party. And, there were people in the audience who didn't speak English. They had headphones on, and up in the booth. They had 3 translators that were translating. And I had these guys erupted and standing. And so following the speech, the 2 women approached me from the Netherlands and asked me if I would please come to Amsterdam and speak to kids there about the Black Panther Party, because she said that children in the Netherlands learn about the Black Panther Party in school, unlike here in the United States. And so that launched a tour there. But I also was introduced to a man who was a Rhodes Scholar and was a professor at Jamk University of Applied Sciences in Finland. And so the guy that introduced him to me to him, we ended up starting that year doing guest lecturing at Jamk University of Applied Sciences in Finland. Every year for the last now 13, 14 years. I go there every year. I stop in Paris every year because I got a community of friends there. But when I go to this university in Finland, and we're usually there about 10 days. And when I go into different classes that are around, that are classes featuring talks on cross-cultural communication, intercultural conflict, intercultural work, diversity, inclusion. The students, before I say a word about any of that stuff, they want to know about the Black Panther Party first.
Right.
Because we've always been acknowledged more so internationally than here in the United States, and embraced. In fact, the head of the department started sending me into high schools in Finland. I have kids in Finland coming up to me asking, how do I start a Black Panther Party in Finland? This is over the last few years. That's the impact of the outreach. See, we were an international organization. People don't realize while we had 60 chapters here in the United States, we had a chapter in London. We had one in New Zealand, the Polynesian Panthers. We had one in Sydney, Australia. We had support groups in Africa and in Vietnam and Japan, China. We had an international.
It still seems relevant today. So when they ask you about starting a party, what do you say? And what
I say the same thing to them as I tell students here in the U.S. that ask me that same question, is that the era has shifted. And the organization that you start will look different, and it'll have it'll have some of the lessons from the Black Panther Party. You need to create something on your own that's unique to who you are in your movement. There's organizations that pop up here and there that call themselves Black Panther Party. There's one in Tacoma today. There's one in somewhere in Eastern Washington. They're not the Black Panther Party. And I really try to encourage these young people, to make sure that they find their own path, learn the lessons from the Black Panther Party. And so that's what I tell these kids in Finland. You've got the challenges that you face around global warming and other issues that are confronting you. You need find your own way, but take the lessons from the Black Panther Party. The things that we succeeded at, the things that got in the way. So that's what I tell them, and so that is really now I'm called every year to speak somewhere internationally. I spoke in Ireland at 6 universities last fall. I spoke in the UK. I'm going back there again next fall. Of course, I'll be in Finland again next fall. And that largely is around my book being released. But I was in Ireland the year before doing another keynote speech on the Black Panther Party. So,
I love that.
so it's it's just it's you got to find your niche, find your groove, and get into it.
Get into your group. So there's two. So we're gonna have to do another conversation. Clearly. Thank you so much, Elmer Dixon. This has been such an honor, such a blessing in 1,000 different ways. I definitely look forward to following up with you. That this is incredible. So your book, for people, do you want people to buy your book on Amazon or from your site?
They can go directly to the publisher, or they can, if they're in the area, they can buy from me, because Amazon is a total ripoff.
That's why I asked, because I know I can find it on Amazon, but they can get it from you. What's the best way to find you? Do you have your website?
They can just reach directly out to me at edixon@executivediversity.com.
You heard it here, y'all. edixon@executivediversity.com. I love it. Elmer Dixon, thank you so much. Such an honor.